Thank you for joining Once Changing the World, which is India's first future tech meets sustainability podcast. And today I'm delighted and honored to have with me Professor Mark Ortiz, who is the founder and director of the Center for Bionics and Pain Research. He's also the professor of bionics at Chalmers and head of neuroprosthetic research at the Bionics Institute. He is heading the world's first research where a patient with an amputation above the elbow has been able to control a bionic hand as if it was his own, leveraging new surgical and engineering advancements, merging humans with machines. So, Professor Max, really appreciate you taking time and being part of the podcast. Why don't we start with a small, brief introduction and background?
Sure. No, thank you for inviting me. So I'm trained as an electronic engineer. So that was my first degree. Then I worked for the manufacturing industry for a couple of years doing automation and a few other things. And I realized that I wanted to do something with a purpose that fitted better my personality, I suppose. So then I quit the job in industry and I moved to. So I'm from Mexico originally. So I did my engineering degree in Mexico. And then I moved to Sweden to do a master's in complex adaptive systems, which at the time was a relatively new science. So it's related to dynamical systems and artificial intelligence, chaos theory, and stuff like that. And then I realized that working in the medical field could be something for me. So then I started doing research in biomedical engineering. So I work on the basis of this project in which we created this concept of a neuromusculoskeletal prosthesis or an interface, which is an implant that allows a connection with the skeleton and the nervous system between the prosthesis and the user. So that became my area of research. I did a PhD on that. Then on the side, I got interested in phantom limb pain because one of the major problems for people with amputation. So then I developed a research program on that. I always had a bit of an industrial foot. So for many years, I was working for a company as well and doing research part-time. And then I decided to go 100% into academia. So I started a lab at the university, and that lab then became or grew to be the Center for Bionics and Pain Research, which is a collaboration between Sahlgrenska University Hospital, which is one of the largest hospitals in Scandinavia, and Chalmers University of Technology and the University of Gothenburg, where the medical faculty is called the Sahlgrenska Academy. So then you have on the academic side, engineering and medicine, and on the practical healthcare side, the hospital. So I moved my group of PhD students and postdocs and researchers and so on into the hospital with the idea of being closer to the patients and the stakeholders to develop technologies that are better suited for purpose, meaning that we're very translational. I'm very practical. So a lot of my research has an application in mind. And I really want to do technologies that are useful for people and that can be implemented. So by being in the hospital and close to the final users and either the doctors or the patients, that makes it a bit easier. So that's been my professional career. And recently this year, I joined the Bionics Institute in Melbourne, Australia. So where I'm starting a research program, and then I keep my position in Sweden. So at least for the coming years, I'm going to be going back and forth every other month or so.
Can you talk about your research in the neuroprosthetics and bionics?
I work with bionic limbs, and the purpose of this, with what we care about, is functionality. So the idea is, how can we use an artificial device to restore the function that was done by your biological hand or legs? And most of our focus has been in upper limbs, so arms. And there, you have a fully artificial part that's the motors and the batteries and the gears and the frames and all that stuff. And then you have the human side. And you need a human machine interface to connect the two. And my work has been on that interface because there's been a lot of prosthetic devices that are already developed that have, say, individually controlled or motors in every finger. So you can have multi-articulated prosthetic devices, but the patient cannot control them intuitively at will. So, and that is because of a lack of human-machine interface. So there are a few problems on this interface. One of them is mechanical. Prosthetic devices are heavy, and the way they're normally attached to the limb is with a socket. And a socket, basically, what it does is put a lot of force or compression over the residual limb to suspend the prosthesis. So when you walk around, the prosthesis stays in place, and it just doesn't fall off. And the heavier the prosthesis, the more force you have to put on the residual limb. And sometimes if the residual limb is very short, you don't have enough space to grab. So then you need to go and obstruct the adjacent joints. And if you think about it, it's not very comfortable to have something doing pressure constantly over your skin. If it's a warm day, you will sweat a lot. So that can be problematic by itself. There's a lot of friction every time there's movement between the skin and this hard surface. So that is known to be a major cause of problems for people with amputations. An alternative to suspend the prosthesis like that is to do a skeletal attachment, so fixating the prosthesis directly into the skeleton. And that can be done thanks to the discovery of osseointegration. And osseointegration, what it means is that if you put a titanium implant inside bone tissue, bone cells grow directly on the surface of titanium, and it anchors it mechanically rather strongly. And that was discovered in the 50s in Gothenburg in Sweden, where I am, by Professor P.I. Brånemark, and the first application was dental implants in the 60s. And since then, his son, Dr. Richard Brånemark, developed it further for limb prosthesis. When I joined the field, osseointegration was used for mechanical attachment, and my work has been to take that technology as a base and re-engineer those implants so we can also have bidirectional communication with implanted electrodes. So then the prosthesis, rather than just having a mechanical connection, now you can have more like a robotic or biomechatronic interface. So with osseointegration, you solve the problem of mechanical attachment, but then the control remained problematic. The standard way you control prosthesis is by putting surface on the skin, electrodes, on the surface of the skin, and those pick up the activity of muscles remnant from the amputation. And the reason why you use muscles is because patients can still control or contract those muscles at will. So you can use the electric signal from those muscles to tell the prosthesis to do something. The problem is that if you have a high amputation, say above the elbow, you only have the biceps and triceps to control the elbow, the wrist, and all the fingers of the hand. So it's not enough information to control that many degrees of freedom. So what we did in this latest paper that was published in Science Translational Medicine last week is that we rearrange the neuromuscular structures in the residual limb so we can extract more information. So for instance, the median nerve allows you to control these three fingers, right? And the median nerve runs above the elbow, and it starts connecting with the muscles in the forearm, which are the extrinsic muscles to controlling the hand. So if you lose your hand at this level, at the wrist, for instance, you have a lot of muscles in the forearm that you can use to control the prosthetic device. But again, higher up, like all those are gone. So what we do is we take that nerve that normally develop a neuroma or always develop a neuroma, actually. And then you cut the neuroma out. We split the nerves into the different bundles or fascicles. And then we use some of those fascicles to reinnervate muscles that are permanent in the amputation or native muscles in the residual limb. But also we take free muscle grafts, small pieces of muscles from the leg, and connect them to these different fascicles. And when we do that, we also place an electrode inside these pieces of muscles. So when the patient thinks about moving the hand, those pieces of muscles will contract in different degrees depending on the axons that ended up in each of those constructs. And then the pattern of electrical activity in all these electroneuromuscular constructs will be different depending on what movement the patient is trying to do. So now that we have this reconstruction and we have electrodes and we can use this implant to communicate with the prosthesis, then we have artificial intelligence algorithms look at the difference pattern of activity in the residual limb and we train it to say, okay, this pattern of activity means closing the hand. This pattern of activity means open the hand and the different movements. And once the algorithm learns to differentiate those different patterns and what they mean, then the next time the patient produces that movement or that activity, then the algorithm knows what to do and tells the prosthesis to do that. And this happens, relatively quickly. We just need the patient to follow some instructions. The algorithm is trained, and then the prosthesis knows what the patient is trying to do. So it's a combination, overall, it's a combination of a surgical reconstruction, implant technology for the nerves and muscles, electronics, so we have analog and digital, and AI to make sense of the algorithms.
Right. So Max, maybe I would want you to elaborate this, further, because you mentioned, if the amputation is a little bit above the elbow, then acquiring those signals are very, very difficult. But you are trying to do it in three ways, where it's the osseointegration plus rearranging the nerves, then you have the human-machine interface. Maybe talk about all of this, how this fuses in together. And this patient that you're working on, is there a single patient that you're working on? Are there multiple patients? What's been the progress? Maybe if you can elaborate on that, would be really nice.
So we use osseointegration to solve the problem of mechanical connection. And then we use implanted electrodes to solve the problem of control. And then, or extracting reliable signals. And then we do surgical reconstruction to increase the sources where we can extract information from. And then there's something that we do that I mentioned so far, which is we place electrodes in the nerve so we can stimulate the afferent fibers, so the sensory fibers, so the patient can feel when the patient, so the prosthesis has sensors, and when the prosthesis interacts with an object, we can stimulate the nerve so he can also feel. And so that's like the whole package. And I started working on this idea in my master thesis back in 2009. And then I developed the implant that was first implanted in a patient in January 2013. And that patient has been using it to control a prosthesis in his daily life for more than 10 years now. And so he continues using it. So that was a paper published actually in Science Translational Medicine back in 2014, where we say, okay, you can have an osseointegrated implant together with implanted electrodes, and this gives you better control, and it allows you to provide also stimulation to the nerves, and the patient will have sensations. So that was like the first step. Then we add the sensory feedback part, and we have patients using sensory feedback in a self-contained prosthesis, meaning that the patients don't need to carry around a backpack with a computer or a battery, like any additional components. Everything is within the prosthesis. So I had a PhD student who developed an embedded system that allows to integrate all the processing that we need within the prosthetic device. So then we published in the New England Journal of Medicine in 2020 3 patients that were using sensory feedback on their daily lives for a couple of years. And in this latest publication, what we did was, in the previous patients, they could only control, say, 1-2 degrees of freedoms of the prosthesis. In this latest publication, by doing more refined surgical reconstruction, we show that you can control many more degrees of freedom in the prosthesis. By degree of freedom, I mean a prosthetic unit that can go in 2 directions, right? So the wrist could be flex and extend or rotate in 2 directions. So that would be a degrees of freedom. And in this case, we have, say, 5 degrees of freedom, which will be every finger flexion and extension. And that's been the progress of the research. But all of this is enabled because we have this neuromusculoskeletal interface that allows to get reliable signals from electrodes implanted inside the body. And now what the research is going, I have parallel tracks in which, say, I have a PhD student looking into surgical procedures. I have another PhD student looking in control. So that's Jens Spinden, who is the first author in this paper. And I have another, research track in which we're looking at sensor feedback. And then an important area is post-amputation pain for us as well. So I have a track on that. And then in the research center, we're also using some of these technologies to restore function after a stroke and nerve injuries. So that's kind of the overall research program that I'm conducting.
Right. So there are millions of amputees around the world. When do you think this technology will be accessible out in the market?
It's hard to tell. So the device, I developed it for a company, and it is up to them to get it up to the market. And it's a challenging thing. I'm hoping that in the next couple of years, it will be out there commercially available. However, this technology requires a surgery. That is a specialized surgery. So surgeons need to be trained. There might be complications. So the healthcare professional need to know how to handle such complications. And it normally takes many years for complex medical devices to be adopted. It is expensive, in comparison with other technologies. It requires a surgery, and there's an implants, and medical devices are expensive in general. And then the prosthesis itself is expensive. So the hardware, the external hardware. And it's not suitable for everybody. I mean, if you have comorbidities that make you be unhealthy from the viewpoint that you have cardiovascular problems where your circulation is not great, and you have an amputation because of that, it'll be hard to have osseointegration happening because of the poor circulation and those comorbidities. And if you smoke, that affects your health. And if you're prone to infections, that will also be a problem. And then if you live in remote areas where might be difficult to get access to a hospital in case you have a complication, that might also not be an ideal thing.
All of these tech stack, obviously the advancements are great, but with its pros, it carries a lot of cons also. Now, talk to me a little bit about this man-machine convergence. We're in the very early days of understanding human biology and, merging, humans with machine, the osseointegration, human-machine interface, where the AI machine learning kind of understands stuff. And the patient kind of interprets it and signal, and uses the prosthetic arm. There are a lot of these movies, the mutants and all, where it's been shown that, the people who get these early kind of access to, these bionic limbs could be the first mutants of sorts. What do you views on something like that?
My work is focused on restoring function, right? Some people do research or try to develop technologies that enhance human abilities. It makes you stronger, faster. You can jump higher, things like that. That is something that I'm not interested myself. I think there are many problems and many diseases that should be fixed before we have those kind of luxury developments. Like I don't think humans need to jump higher, run faster. So that is what comes to mind a lot on these sci-fi movies when humans are enhanced by technology. We will do it because we can. It's a matter of time before we start enhancing ourselves in such a way. The human hand is a marvelous result of evolution, right? And it is great because it's very dexterous. It allows you to take something like my kids and manipulating them, even if I'm not looking at them, because I have like a rich sensory feedback and degrees of freedoms that are enough to do complex tasks. And they're also very fast. And when you try to do that with an artificial means, motors and actuators and so on, you often have a trade-off between speed and strength. So we can make a prosthetic hand that is very strong, but not dexterous. And if you go dexterous, it's normally not very strong and maybe not so fast. So we are nowhere close to a point where somebody will say, you know, I would like to have this artificial limb rather than my own biological hand. And the sensory feedback is really poor. I think that that's something that we don't even know how. The major challenge in neural engineering, in prosthetics in general, is the resolution of the neural interface. So how do we connect to, say, every single axon in your peripheral nerves, or like, you know, all the parts of your brain? We don't even know how to achieve that technologically. We need to come up with a new technology that allows to do that. So we don't know how to do that. There's a theoretical limit on the application of electricity, for instance, because electricity radiates, so it's hard to contain and only stimulate what you want to stimulate. Optogenetics, sonogenetics, some technique like that might be a solution, but done in the periphery is a little bit complicated because you have viral vectors and so on. So I'm not particularly concerned about this transhumanism business. It's a luxury endeavor of our species, and we will do it because we can. and there'll be people that will spend their lives and careers doing that, and they'll justify themselves in some way. I philosophically think that we have so many problems in this world, and the people with high cognitive abilities have almost a moral obligation to use them to solve those problems rather than create stuff that like we don't need.
Fair enough. Max, you said that, we are very, very far away from understanding a cognitive structure, and maybe we just might not reach over there. But somebody who's been at the forefront in pioneering bionic limbs, what are your views on, when do you think we'll be having bionic limbs such as ours, maybe as dexterous, and instead of maybe osseointegration, maybe is there a way where you could just possibly, there could be no surgery, but it kind of merges with our brain and kind of, is there something which is possible?
If you refer, if you're thinking about an artificial limb, again, the challenge is the neural interface. And that's where we will have to, a technological breakthrough will need to happen for us to be able to have like full dexterity, or if we go anthropomorphical, so like a hand that looks like a human hand, that's only one way to solve the problem of manipulating objects, right? Like, and often, say for instance, the little finger is like, you don't really use it. I mean, it's good to have it there, but you could do well with just like 4 fingers. And therefore you can say, I mean, do we need to spend efforts to, control the little fingers? Maybe a tentacle might be more useful depending on what you want to do. So I think there are many prosthetic devices that do not look like a hand. There are hooks and grafers and so on that are very useful for patients. I think, the device should be fit for purpose. The nice thing about a human hand is that it serves multiple purpose, but it can do that because we have dexterity. So until we don't achieve that, it's hard to tell if that is, the ultimate design that we should be looking for. I think technology for prosthetic devices will continue improving. I think within the next 5 years, we're going to have much better control and sensory feedback with technologies like we have developed and others are, trying to get out there. The options for somebody who loses a limb or is born without one are going to be much better in the developed world. And hopefully once that goes down in price or like cost, then they get adopted or they're made more accessible in the developing countries.
You're also leveraging virtual reality and augmented reality for phantom limb pain. Can you talk about that?
When I was doing my work on developing the algorithms to control the prosthesis, I have patients that were kind enough to donate their time to help me testing them. And then I learned about the problems with phantom limb pain. And I thought that maybe if we can provide control over a virtual limb in a way that we cannot do for a prosthetic device because it doesn't have that many degrees of freedom, then that might help the patients to relieve phantom limb pain. So I tried that with one patient in 2013, and we got very promising results because it was somebody who was 74 years old, I think, at the time of the 73, 74 at the time of treatment. And he's been 48 or so, more than half of his life with phantom limb pain. And in 18 sessions, he was almost, he had very little phantom limb pain left. So I keep developing that treatment further. And then at the clinical trial, we found similar results, and we just finalized another clinical trial. And now I develop a new treatment that also incorporates sensory training, not only motor training. And we use virtual and augmented reality or mixed reality to provide real-time feedback on what intention of movement, the patient is trying to do. And that allows them to regain control over their phantom limb and basically utilize the same neural circuits that were affected by the amputation. And by using those neural circuits, by giving a purpose to all that circuitry, we're relieving phantom limb by separating the processing. That is the working hypothesis. What
comes next for you?
We're starting a large randomized clinical trial on phantom limb pain, for instance, and I have implemented this technology around the world in many countries. And this clinical trial will also help us to get the new treatment out there. We're trying to improve when it comes to the prosthetic side, improve the controllability and sensory feedback, and I try to bring this technology to more patients. And we have some ideas on surgical procedures to make the controllability better and the sensory feedback richer. So we're doing that we'll have a clinical trial on the use of the surgical procedures. And now with the Bionics Institute, we'll continue doing this research and developing new active implantable devices that help in all of this work.
Professor, really, really appreciate you taking time being part of the podcast. Wish you the very best. The journey you are on helping people who are disabled. I hope that this research progresses further, and I hope that this research translates or moves from the lab to the market and helps those millions of people around the world. So wish you the very best. And to my listeners, if you like what you see in here, then please press the subscribe button. Until next time, see you guys. Bye-bye. Thank you. Appreciate this.